He's gone. Not breathing. Perfect. That means we'll get the insurance money and the inheritance, despite the fact that they hit me with their car. They had such a conversation and left the scene. Though I was dazed and couldn't move, I was fuming with anger and remained conscious. That man's voice, it was my husband, Bob. I can't just die like this. Eventually, I passed out. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. And for some reason, my seriously injured husband was lying next to me. My name is Sally Thompson. I'm a 46-year-old part-time working housewife. I live with my husband, John, who's 4 years older than me. We have a daughter and a son, both of whom are married and have their own families. John is a businessman and CEO of his company. Though I have the esteemed title of CEO's wife, I wasn't into luxuries and wanted to work, so I took on a part-time job. My husband led a work-centric life, so we seldom had time just for us as a couple. Given his responsible position as CEO, I accepted that this was inevitable. One day, amidst these peaceful times, my father fell seriously ill and had to be hospitalized. My father lived in a town about 2 train stops away and shared his home with my younger brother and his wife. Dad was a public high school teacher, and after retiring, he continued working as a temporary staff member. Given that the hospital where my father was admitted was close to my place, and considering my younger brother and his wife had little kids, I took on the responsibility of visiting and caring for my father. My mother had passed away from an illness years ago, so the news of Dad's severe condition, considering he single-handedly raised my brother and me, was a shock. With both kids grown and independent, I had hoped Dad could finally have a relaxed retirement. How heartbreaking. My father's illness progressed rapidly, and he passed away just 3 months after being hospitalized. In his final moments, he told us with a smile that he wasn't lonely because Mom was waiting for him on the other side. Dad's funeral, while modest, saw many of his former students and colleagues come to pay their respects. My younger brother gracefully fulfilled his role as the chief mourner, and the portrait of our smiling father seemed to beam with pride at his son's strength. After the burial, I returned home in the car driven by my husband. Seeing me downcast, my husband tried to comfort me, saying, "Your dad must have been a great teacher. Everyone seemed to truly mourn his passing. Dad always worked so hard, both in his job and raising us. I can't believe he's gone so suddenly. I know, I hate to bring this up now, but I've got a business trip for the next 3 days. Will you be okay on your own?" "Thanks for worrying." "I'll be fine. With the memorial service and other rituals coming up, I'll be busy. It'll help keep my mind off things. I'll do my best to get away from work for the memorial. I'm counting on you to handle things." Lately, it seemed like my husband's job had become even busier, with unexpected trips becoming more frequent. Sometimes he'd go straight from the office to his trip, and his secretary would even come by our house to pick up his luggage. That's how hectic things were. One day, after coming home from my part-time job, I was surprised to bump into his secretary leaving our house. At that moment, the secretary said to me, "While you were at work, the boss had forgotten some important documents, so I came back to retrieve them." "Oh, I'm so sorry. My husband must have caused you quite some trouble. With you working, it must be hard to help out the boss much, right?" "Well, thank you for always being there for him." All I could do was express my gratitude, but I couldn't help noticing the secretary seemed quite displeased. I began to worry she might not think too highly of a boss who sends her on such errands. I felt the need to call my husband and caution him about it later. "You know, it's not right to use your employees for personal errands. If you let me know, I can handle it. Just give me a heads up next time." "Yeah, I forgot you were working too. I'll make sure of it next time." Sometime after that, following the 49-day memorial service for my father, the will regarding the inheritance was unsealed in the presence of a lawyer. My father, being a teacher, had a modest pension saved up. However, my late mother, who passed away earlier, was the only child of a wealthy family and had inherited a significant amount. The contents of my father's will stated that none of my mother's inheritance should be touched, and that my brother and I should equally inherit it. Furthermore, the remainder of his pension was to be donated to a scholarship fund for orphans. True to his nature, the will was just as we'd expected. My brother and I agreed to its terms and left everything in the hands of the lawyer. My husband, who attended the will's unveiling, was surprised. He hadn't known about my mother's wealth since she had passed away before our marriage. A few days later, I was home alone. My husband wouldn't be back from his business trip for another 3 days. While my father was in the hospital, I was busy caring for him. Now, having time with no one to tend to, it all felt rather pointless, and I was quite downcast. Memories of my father kept coming back to me that day. Before I knew it, night had fallen, and feeling hungry, I decided to make some tea and put the kettle on the stove. Wondering what to eat, I wasn't in the mood to cook just for myself, so I thought about grabbing some takeout. Given how late it was, the only place still open was probably the convenience store. With that, I headed outside and began to walk aimlessly. It seemed to have rained earlier, as the ground was wet. My bare feet and sandals felt cold every time they stepped into a puddle. In a few minutes, I reached the nearby convenience store. Careful not to slip with my wet sandals, I began selecting a ready meal. Entering the brightly lit store with its upbeat music and passing a few other shoppers, my previously foggy thoughts began to clear up. Then suddenly, a memory struck me like lightning. It was of myself, back at home putting the kettle on the stove. I couldn't help but shout out loud. Oh no, that's right, I left the stove on at home. I quickly paid for the ready meal I was holding and dashed out of the convenience store, heading home. How many minutes had it been since I left home? The kettle's water must have boiled by now. Could the overflowing water have put out the stove's flame, leaving the gas still spewing? Could the now empty kettle be overheating and catching fire? First, thinking I needed to call the gas company to shut off the gas, I continued walking while looking at my smartphone screen. Because of that, I didn't notice the car that was speeding towards me from nearby. The car didn't have its headlights on, so when I felt the impact, I couldn't see a thing. The sensation of being slammed to the ground and the intense pain took my breath away. I found myself face down, and through my blurring vision, I could see the wet road and the car's tires stopping beyond it. Then people got out and began running towards me. I thought, thank goodness, they're coming to help, but as I began to lose consciousness, I heard a chilling conversation between a man and a woman. He's not breathing. We did it. Perfect. The insurance money will come through, and we'll get the inheritance too. Listen, you head back home quickly. I'll take care of the car. Got it? Hey, make sure you don't leave anything in the car. I know. Please hold onto my purse for me. Having exchanged these words, the two of them left the scene. Feeling my breath growing shallow, I watched the receding car lights and listened to the fading sound of the car. I couldn't move, but anger kept my mind sharp. That man's voice. It was my husband. I can't just die like this. But who would find me, unable to move even a finger, lying on this dark road? As fear overcame me due to the chilling premonition, I faintly heard a voice from my still active smartphone. No way, I'm giving up. We're unclear on your request. Please provide your address. This is the customer service center for the gas company. I repeat, with all my might. I yelled at the screen of the smartphone hanging from my neck holder. Help, call an ambulance. Please stay on the line. I'm connecting you to emergency services. After that, I heard a voice from the fire department through my phone. Gasping for breath, I managed to reply, then blacked out. When I came to, I was in a hospital. Waking up felt awful. The room seemed to spin, and intense nausea hit me. It seemed like vomit was flowing out through a tube in my stomach, causing pain in my throat and back. Tears streamed down my face. Mom, you're awake. Are you okay? Mom, I heard the voices of my daughter and son. A wave of relief washed over me, realizing I was safe. That's right. What happened to my husband and that woman after that? Since I'm alive, they must be sensing danger. Also, I wonder what happened to our house with the stove left on. With a strained and painful throat, I managed to speak. What about the house? How's John? My children exchanged glances upon hearing my question. They carefully chose their words before informing me. As I had feared, our house was completely destroyed in a fire. Oddly enough, my husband, who was supposed to be on a business trip, was in the house. He was rescued but is in critical condition. Around the same time they heard this news, they were informed that I was involved in an accident and undergoing emergency surgery. In the wake of their parents' calamities, my children were in a panic and rushed to be by our side. I said, critically injured from the fire. Heek, hee hee hee, ahaha. My sudden laughter left my children in shock. My husband had been transported to the same hospital and at the family's request, was placed in the bed next to mine. My in-laws were there with him, and hearing my laughter, they were startled and came over. My Mill asked, "What's going on? Has Sarah lost her mind?" My Phil scolded me. "Jason is in critical condition and can't even speak. What are you laughing at?" Seeing the angered in-laws, my children defended me, explaining that I too was still in serious condition. Upon hearing this, the in-laws understood, thinking I was deeply shocked and called for a doctor. Given my agitated state, the doctor administered a sedative, and I soon drifted back into sleep. While asleep, I had a dream. It was a dream of my father. He's trying to wake me up in the morning saying, "You're going to be late." Dad had always looked after me like this, filling the role of a mother. But I was so sleepy and just wanted to stay in bed when suddenly he shouted with a stern face, "Wake up, Sarah!" Startled, I jolted awake to see a familiar woman standing before me. It was definitely my husband's secretary. She was clutching a syringe, seemingly ready to inject something into my fore. I quickly pulled out my fore and hit the nurse call button. "Stop it!" At my cry for help, my husband's secretary tried to flee but collided with a nurse who had rushed into the room, dropping the syringe on the floor. The scene erupted in chaos as the nurse called for backup and a doctor rushed in to examine me. After that, I was transferred to a private room in the ICU. Visits were prohibited, and I was questioned by the police. I testified as much as I could remember from the time of the accident. So I was treated as a victim of the incident, and police protection was provided during my hospital stay. Eventually, as my bruises and cuts healed, and it was expected that my fractured collarbone would fully recover with rest, I was moved to a regular room, and the police detail was removed. That's because my husband, the assailant, and his mistress, the secretary, were arrested. I learned about what happened during my stay in the private room from my younger brother, Mike, who came to visit. Firstly, the secretary who broke into my room claimed she had work-related matters for my husband. She then attempted to harm me as I lay in the adjacent bed. The secretary was taken away by the police after the hospital staff reported her, but she's been remaining silent. My husband, on the other hand, had severe burns on his throat, making it hard for him to breathe or talk. However, he recovered faster than I did and was arrested upon his discharge. He kept insisting that my testimony was baseless and untrue, but the police had surprising evidence up their sleeve. It was the recorded data from the customer service center of the gas company that I had called just before the accident. The operator of that emergency call had recorded the conversation, just as I had testified. The car that presumably hit me was caught on a convenience store security camera and was found to be stolen. A gang involved in providing stolen vehicles for a fee was busted. And it seems they had connections with my husband and his secretary. Regarding the fire at our home, the kitchen was the most burnt area. It appeared that my negligence with fire was the cause, and it seemed my husband was just caught up in the fire, though our house was completely burned down. A bag containing the secretary's ID badge was found among the charred remains. proving the relationship between my husband and his secretary. My younger brother, Mike, was heartbroken that I faced such a tragedy soon after losing our father. Later on, my children came to visit, angry and mourning over their father's misdeeds. Eventually, once I fully recovered, I was discharged from the hospital and moved into a rental apartment that Mike had arranged for me. My in-laws came to visit me, apologized, and said they would pay for everything. According to them, my husband had been having an affair with his secretary, but when she pressured him to marry her, he tried to figure out a way to divorce me without paying alimony. That's when he hatched that horrifying plan. Additionally, my recent substantial inheritance seemed to have triggered his plot. He apparently saw it as an opportunity to secure both my wealth after my demise and a marriage with his mistress. However, my accidental mistake of leaving the kettle on the stove, which shouldn't have happened, ironically saved my life and exposed my husband's wicked scheme. The reason my husband, who was supposed to be on a business trip, was home was apparently to answer the home phone when the news of the accident came in, creating an alibi. Though his business trip was supposed to be for 3 days, he wrapped up work in just 1 day, spending the next 2 days with his mistress. I learned from my lawyer that it was then he conceived and executed this plan. During my hospital stay, I discovered my husband had taken out a hefty insurance policy on me, which fortunately covered all my hospital bills. Later on, I hired the attorney arranged by my in-laws and successfully divorced my incarcerated husband, claiming $120,000 in alimony. Pressured by his parents, my ex-husband liquidated all his assets and savings to pay me in one lump sum. I had no intention of forgiving his mistress, the secretary, so I demanded $50,000 for emotional distress and $40,000 in damages from her. Whether she can afford it or not, I intend to seize her assets if necessary to get paid. I have no plans to ever interact with my ex-husband again, but I do feel sorry for our kids who now have a criminal for a father. Though my physical wounds have healed, the emotional scars remain deep, so I plan to take some time off work and go on an extended trip. Though it seems I was saved by chance, I can't help but feel I was somehow protected by a higher force. I believe my late father's call at that moment saved me. I intend to live my life cherishing the life my father protected.